Released with the name Shadow Warriors for Europe and in Japan as Ninja Ryokenden, or more widely known as Ninja Gaiden, this Tecmo 1988 release was likely in your collection at some point during childhood. This game was a huge deal in its day and was the first of its franchise to spawn many sequels. Let me start with this. Shadow Warriors or Ninja Gaiden has two very different versions. The NES game, for example, was a side-scrolling platformer. Why? Because that was the times the Nintendo was a bit strange like that. So this is the worst of best ports for the arcade original game, which was the full-on side-scrolling beat-em-up. If you have only been used to knowing about the Nintendo NES version, which is fairly likely, this video is going to blow your mind. Where do I start with this god-awful Commodore 64 conversion? Well, just look at it. It's pitiful to look at and even worse to play. This was a game I had as a kid on the re-release Hit Squad label. Did I like it back then? No. I pretty much thought it was just as ridiculous as I do playing it for this video. Let's talk about hit collision detection. This means when a sprite touches something, it detects it and creates something from it. In other words, when I hit a baddie, the baddie is supposed to stop. Not with the C64 Shadow Warriors, you don't. Enemies will walk through you like you weren't there, like you're just some sort of ghost. And this even happens when they're beating you up and you're beating them up. It's just a mess. The enemy sprites are just plain ugly, over-pixelated, and more suited for, say, a 1982 C64 game rather than this 1990 trash promotion. The arcades game gives you weaponry upgrades, but not here. The arcades game feels fun to play. Definitely not here. The arcades game gives you in-game music. Again, not here. The game is likely the worst fighting game on the C64, likely right next to Highlander. I am not exaggerating. For those who had this game originally will know what I am talking about, and I am not even going to talk about the cassette loading times for this game. The game is very ugly and colours are washed out. If you enjoyed this game once, I would be questioning your sanity. We all play games for fun, or that's how it should be. They are part of the entertainment industry. Then we have the Amstrad CPC conversion. This game is not fun for many reasons. Firstly, it doesn't scroll, and so when we move to the right hand side, you could potentially have a few baddies waiting for you. And once they punch you, you will pause with no other option than to wait for them to punch you so many times that you die. Collision detection isn't as horrific as the C64 port, and there was at least some thought at some point put into this, at least where colours and sprites were concerned. A massive improvement over the shoddy C64 conversion, but that's not very hard. A nice addition to this conversion is objects will explode when positioning baddies behind objects or in front of objects and kicking them into those objects. Like I say, there has at least been a little bit of thought put into this conversion. The real big issue with the Amstrad CPC conversion, besides a couple of other things, is that sprites will move like bats out of hell. Possibly the only version of this game where the player's head looks like a Lego head. Firstly, this is a multi-scorer and we can now see enemies coming. Even though this Spectrum version is difficult, no in-game music here, but sound effects aren't too bad. One feature I did like with this port is the ability to swing on poles to bash into enemies. Collision detection can be hit or miss here. It's definitely not wonderful, but the best so far in this list. Sadly, just like a couple of other conversions, once a baddie starts beating on you, you have to stand there and take it like a Lego head. You cannot maneuver out of this at all. Spectrum's port isn't the best, but much more playable than the Commodore 64 or CPC versions. The IBM PC compatible version, which released as Ninja Gaiden back in 1989, is kinda like Micro Machines in scale. It comes with the typical excruciating beeper music which halts when sound effects kicks in. In terms of colour, it's fairly nicely done, and although it does look very different from other versions, it's not bad for a DOS game of this time. We get crashes and explosions too when enemies or the player gets hit into objects. It's not particularly much to brag about, but a slight upgrades from the 8-bit microcomputer conversions. The Atari ST conversion is a step in the right direction here. Although it's far from perfect, we have typical 8-bit sounding music, and the layout of the game and the sprites are all fairly well put together. The issue with the Atari ST port is firstly, it's not multi-scrolling. Secondly, it struggles to run at full speed, especially when too much is happening during gameplay. This can cause some annoying frame drops. Music cuts out a tad when action is taking place, which reminds me of the DOS version of this game. Just like the Amstrad CPC port, without multi-scrolling, it can make it difficult when walking to the next screen and you are suddenly confronted with a bunch of enemies waiting to attack you. It's not the worst of these conversions, but like I say, a step in the right direction of getting that real arcade feel. It's not every day that you'll find an 8-bit portable system, especially the Atari Lynx, which has a superior game compared with microcomputers, but the Atari Lynx totally rocks it with its version of Shadow Warriors. And guess what? It might come as a surprise, but Ocean did not publish it, and that's why we have a fairly good version here, which was actually published by Atari at the time of its 1991 release. So what is included here? Well, pretty much a very comprehensive and very faithful portable version of the arcade game, only on a smaller screen with a much lower resolution. It sounds great with its music and combined sound effects. Collision detection actually feels fairly decent here. Enemies and characters in general look like the source material and not blocks of pixelated mess. Multi-scrolling is pretty top notch here, and we can even see smashing enemies into objects, which looks pretty cool with this version. This is very likely to be one of the Lynx's best games. It even comes with a nice introduction to the game too. We'll make a note here that Atari decided to call this version Ninja Gaiden rather than Shadow Warriors. And in first place, the Commodore Amiga's 1989 Ocean conversion is actually a really damn good one. It looks really nice and plays nicely too, with some almost arcade accurate collision detection here. Sure, there is no in-game music, but the high quality sound effects and even added voice synth makes up for all this. Sometimes for conversions of arcade games, something needs to be sacrificed to make room for floppy disk space. The Amiga port actually felt like I was playing a good beat 'em up. Everything from the fancy introduction animation, objects, explosions is very high quality, and you can even get away from harm rather than standing static and taking it until you die. I am very confident that Amiga owners would have been truly laughing at the poor 8-bit computer owners versions back in the day. And that's it for my Shadow Warrior stroke Ninja Gaiden ranking the ports. So would you like me and that truly diabolical Commodore 64 conversion, or was you lucky enough to have it on the Atari Lynx or the Commodore Amiga? As always, let us know in the comments, and until next video, thanks for watching.